What does it look like when the most valuable player in baseball history loses his patience? Not a press conference. Not a polished statement. Not a carefully worded response filtered through a PR team. A table. A bang. And a locker room that went completely silent. Before the Los Angeles Dodgers faced the Texas Rangers, something happened behind closed doors that nobody was supposed to talk about. An emergency meeting called without warning. 3 pitchers informed they no longer had a roster spot. And at the center of it all, Shohei Ohtani, a man famous for his calm, his routine, his unshakable composure, sitting at a table and making a sound that echoed through the entire organization. This wasn't the Ohtani the world knows from home run reels and MVP ceremonies. This was something different. Something the Dodgers had never seen before. And when manager Dave Roberts called that emergency meeting, every person in that room understood, this wasn't Roberts speaking. This was Shohei's word being carried out. So what exactly happened? What pushed Ohtani to that breaking point? And what does this moment reveal about the real power structure inside the most expensive team ever assembled in baseball history? Let's break it down, from the beginning. To understand why this moment was so shocking, you first have to understand who Shohei Ohtani is behind the scenes. People who have shared a clubhouse with Ohtani consistently describe the same thing. Quiet. Focused. Disciplined beyond what most professional athletes can even imagine. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't complain publicly. He doesn't demand attention or special treatment. His routine is almost mechanical in its consistency. He arrives before anyone else. He leaves after most have gone home. Every meal, every training session, every warm-up drill, executed with the same level of precision every single day. Former teammates have described watching him eat in the team cafeteria as almost unsettling in its discipline. While others laughed and relaxed, Ohtani would quietly consume exactly what his body needed, nothing more, nothing less. No exceptions. No cheat days. No compromises. This is a man who has built himself into the greatest two-way player in the history of professional baseball, not through natural talent alone, but through an almost obsessive commitment to the process. Every detail controlled. Every variable managed. So when a man like that loses composure, even for a moment, you stop everything and pay attention. Because it doesn't happen without a very serious reason. The cracks had been forming for weeks. The Dodgers entered this season carrying the weight of historic expectations. A roster built like a super team. A payroll that shattered every record in baseball history. A fanbase that wasn't just hoping for a championship, they were expecting one. But behind the polished lineup and the highlight reel offense, the bullpen had been quietly becoming a disaster. Game after game, leads were surrendered in the late innings. Pitchers who looked sharp on paper were falling apart under pressure. The communication between the mound and the dugout was breaking down at the worst possible moments. Signs were getting crossed. Pitch selections were questionable. And most critically, the trust between the starting unit and the bullpen was beginning to fracture. For most players, this is frustrating but manageable. You complain quietly, you trust the front office to make adjustments, and you keep playing. But for Shohei Ohtani, this was something else entirely. Because Ohtani doesn't just play baseball. He competes at a level where every single variable matters. Every run that shouldn't have been surrendered is a run that directly impacts the outcome of a season he has invested everything into. When the bullpen fails, it isn't just a team problem for Ohtani, it's a direct threat to everything he has sacrificed and built. And he had been watching. Quietly. Carefully. The way he watches everything. Until he couldn't stay quiet anymore. The meeting wasn't on the schedule. That's what made it different. Scheduled meetings are bureaucratic. They have agendas, talking points, time limits. People come prepared with excuses and explanations. This meeting was called with almost no notice, hours before the Rangers game, in a room that filled up with tension before a single word was spoken. Dave Roberts stood at the front. But the people in that room understood something immediately. This wasn't Roberts operating on his own instinct. The meeting had been called following Shohei's word. That phrase would circulate through the organization in the hours and days that followed. Not Roberts' decision. Not the front office's decision. Shohei's word. What exactly was communicated in that meeting has not been fully disclosed. But the outcome was crystal clear. 3 pitchers were designated for assignment. DFA'd. Removed from the roster with the kind of speed and decisiveness that sent a message far louder than any public statement ever could. In baseball, a DFA is not unusual. Rosters shift constantly. Players get moved, reassigned, released. It happens hundreds of times across a season throughout the league. But 3 pitchers. At once. Hours before a game. Following a conversation that traced back to Ohtani. That is not routine. That is a statement. And every player on that roster received that statement clearly. The standard here is not negotiable. The expectations here are not flexible. When Shohei Ohtani identifies a problem, the organization moves. Immediately. Now let's talk about the moment that started everything. The moment that reportedly triggered the chain of events leading to that emergency meeting. Ohtani banging on the table. For most athletes, a table bang is nothing. A moment of frustration, quickly forgotten. But for someone with Ohtani's reputation for composure, this single gesture carried enormous weight. People who were present have described the atmosphere in the room before it happened. It wasn't a sudden explosion of anger. It wasn't a meltdown. It was quieter than that, and somehow more powerful because of it. Ohtani had been listening. To conversations about the bullpen. To explanations that weren't satisfying. To a level of accountability that didn't match the standard he holds himself to every single day without exception. And then, the table. Not screaming. Not throwing things. Not a dramatic confrontation. Just a single, controlled act that communicated everything words weren't capturing. This is not acceptable. This needs to change. Now. The room understood. Roberts understood. The front office understood. What followed was not panic, it was precision. The same kind of precision Ohtani brings to every at-bat, every training session, every meal. The organization responded to his standard the same way his body responds to his discipline, with focused, immediate action. But not everyone responded with quiet acceptance. The DFA decisions created immediate backlash. And it came from a direction that surprised even some inside the organization. Reports emerged of what can only be described as hair-dryer protests, heated, emotional confrontations behind closed doors where affected players and their representatives voiced anger over the decisions. The term hair-dryer in sports culture refers to the kind of dressing down where the force of words alone feels physical. Up close. Loud. Personal. Players who felt blindsided by the sudden moves pushed back hard. Arguments were made about fairness, about process, about the way the decisions had been communicated. The speed of it all, the lack of what felt like due process, created a friction that threatened to spread beyond the individuals directly affected. And then came the threat that escalated everything to a completely different level. Threats to tear up Ohtani's uniform. This wasn't a metaphor. This wasn't vague frustration aimed at management. This was targeted, direct, and deeply personal, an attack aimed at the man who was perceived as the source of the decisions that had just upended 3 careers. In any professional sports environment, this crosses a line. But in the context of who Shohei Ohtani is, his standing in the sport, his contract, his cultural significance, his relationship with the entire Dodgers organization and fanbase, this threat carried a weight that couldn't be ignored. The organization's response was swift and unambiguous. There would be no tolerance for this. The incident was handled internally, but the message was clear to everyone watching from inside the clubhouse walls. You don't come for Ohtani. Not here. Not in this organization. Here is the part that the highlights and the statistics don't capture. Shohei Ohtani is not simply the best player on the Los Angeles Dodgers. He is, in a very real and functional sense, the standard by which every decision in that organization is now measured. This is unprecedented in modern baseball. Players have influence. Stars have leverage. Superstars can shape rosters through free agency choices and informal conversations with management. But what happened before the Rangers game represents something beyond that. A manager calling an emergency meeting. 3 players removed from the roster simultaneously. The explicit acknowledgement, following Shohei's word, that the action traced back to a conversation with the player, not the front office, not the analytics department, not the coaching staff alone. Ohtani has never sought this kind of power publicly. He has never positioned himself as a clubhouse politician or a roster decision-maker. He shows up, he works, he produces at a level no one in baseball history has ever matched as a two-way player. But power doesn't always come from demanding it. Sometimes it comes from being so undeniably essential, so completely irreplaceable, that the organization naturally reorganizes itself around your standards. That is what has happened in Los Angeles. And the Rangers game moment simply made it visible. It would be easy to look at this story and see a superstar throwing his weight around. Using his contract, his status, his influence to reshape the roster to his liking. But that reading misses the point completely. Ohtani banged on that table not because he wanted power. He banged on that table because he has invested everything, his body, his diet, his daily routine, his entire life structure, into winning. Not into being famous. Not into being rich. He is already both of those things beyond what most humans can comprehend. He wants to win. At the highest possible level. With the highest possible standard applied to every component of the team around him. When the bullpen fails repeatedly, it isn't just a statistical problem for Ohtani. It is a direct contradiction of everything he represents and demands of himself. He doesn't allow himself to take a day off from his standard. He doesn't allow himself to eat the wrong thing, skip the right preparation, or approach a game with anything less than total commitment. So when the people around him do exactly that, when the standard slips, when accountability goes missing, when results that should be avoided keep happening, his frustration isn't personal. It isn't political. It's philosophical. He is asking one simple question of everyone in that locker room. The same question he asks himself every single morning when he begins his routine before most of his teammates are even awake. Are you doing everything possible to give this team the best chance to win? When the answer is no, the table gets the message first. The Rangers game came and went. The roster moved on without the 3 DFA'd pitchers. The organization absorbed the friction of the protests and the uniform threat and continued forward. But something shifted that day that won't simply reset. The players remaining on that roster now understand something they may have understood intellectually before, but now feel in a much more concrete way. Shohei Ohtani's presence on this team is not just about his batting average or his ERA or his MVP awards. It is about a standard. A daily, uncompromising, non-negotiable standard that he has maintained since he was a teenager, setting Rice Bowl quotas and building a body capable of doing things no baseball player had done before him.